Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. Good morning to the online audience as well, and the people who are there in person, of course. As Martin has said, my name is Nina Röhrig. I work for Marburg University, and we have been involved with Carbon Connects for the last 3 years and have been working mainly on the business modeling side of things in our work package. And I'd like to give you some results of what we have been doing there. And we've been looking, or for today's presentation specifically, looking into the socioeconomic barriers and enablers of rewetting. So when we think about business models for peatland sites, there's of course a lot to consider, and we need to start from the premise of what are site conditions. So in which regions are we? Of course, in Carbon Connect, we did cover a lot of different places in Europe with very different site conditions as well. So what are people currently doing? What are they used to doing? What options do they currently see for the sites? And then as well, thinking about a situation post-rewetting, what can people think about doing in the future? What options do they see? What buyers are there maybe for these products that they or the materials that they create from the rewetted peatlands? And also, of course, the situation around subsidies and financing and paying for rewetting or for the products from the rewetted peatlands afterwards. So a lot to consider, and yeah, a lot to maybe think about. So how did we do this in Carbon Connects, and what was our sort of approach to talking about this with people? The background of it was that we come from a background of value chains and production networks analysis in our working group, and we wanted to apply this approach to the rewetted peatland situations. And global value chains and production networks as well looks very much at like a sequential character of economic activity, so that it is very fragmented nowadays. And it thereby follows products or a commodity or service as well along a so-called value chain, where the value of the product increases along this chain. And so we look at different questions: how are values created in networks? How is value enhanced? How or who actually captures values though? So it is a lot about actors and different actors in the network also having different amounts of power that they can exert, and the influence that this has on other stakeholders. And then, of course, it also looks at how are these systems embedded in wider societal, but also political and institutional contexts. And this is also, of course, very important when we look at rewetting issues. And the way that we did it is we commonly do it is through semi-structured interviews. So this is like a qualitative approach. And we did these interviews with 38 actors in 6 different countries of the project. We wanted to do it face-to-face, of course, but due to COVID, it looked more like that it was telephone interviews mainly, or even interviews in like online settings. Yes. Okay, so the case studies that we looked at within Carbon Connect were these that you can see here. So in France, we had an extensive livestock system on peat meadows, mainly around the lake of Grandlieu, which we looked at. Then in Ireland and the UK, the systems were quite similar. So here we looked at livestock farming models, and especially in relation to peatland rewetting and peatland restoration, options and opinions on this from farmers. And then in the Netherlands, the focus was more on the cultivation of cattail for building insulation, but also for growing substrates or for feed as silage for dairy cows. And in Belgium, the case study was around composting biomass from peatland restoration or peatland conservation sites, and to use this as soil improvers. But today's results will focus mainly on the outputs of the studies from Ireland, the UK, and the Netherlands. So looking then after the interviews at the different barriers and enablers, we can identify, we could group them into certain groups of factors that maybe relate to each other, but maybe that also belong together. So the first bigger group are these 3 barriers and enablers that relate to the practices on the ground, which of course are influenced by and influence themselves research that is happening. This then of course feeds into knowledge exchange, which also has a backfeed or feedback maybe again to research as well. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong direction. Then the other big group is market and networks, or market networks, where these are, of course, closely linked to research and to the practices on the ground as well. Another big group of factors that can enable or hinder rewetting are payments, of course. So these can come in different forms. Those can be subsidies, so public money, that can have direct influence on what practices are actually beneficial and which can be maybe compatible as well with other practices that are happening already on drained peatlands. But also this relates to new forms of payments in terms of payments for ecosystem services or carbon credits, for example. And then, of course, very important regulation, which has a direct influence again on payments, on the practices on the ground as well, and which gets fed by research, but surely also has an interest in asking research for questions or for answers maybe. And then above all, maybe, which is also really important, is mindsets and is maybe awareness as well for certain topics, and we'll come to that later. And then influence and mindset maybe could be through knowledge exchange. So this is sort of the big topics that we looked at, and we'll go a bit more into detail on some of them now. So looking at payments, we are talking about different types of payments. As I said, on the one hand, talking about payments that people would need to help them cover costs for the rewetting itself, so for infrastructure or for manpower works on the ground. But we're also thinking about a long-term income compensation, and this maybe relates especially to situations where we have, business models that cannot work anymore on rewetted peatlands, thinking of maybe rewetted upland peatlands in Ireland and the UK, where places need to be destocked, and where this is basically the only or the main income from the land at the moment. So people say we need some sort of compensation for this, if this is what we are supposed to do. But then also going further from this, payments for other things, so payments for services that a wet peatland can provide, so keeping the peatland in a good condition and in a functioning condition, and the options of monetizing ecosystem services is also something that is brought up by some people on the ground, some farmers, but it's maybe a bit more, people are a bit more hesitant, and they don't really know a lot about how this would work. But the idea for this is then also to incorporate this ecological value maybe into the product value of things that they produce on the ground. So maybe that is also an option. Then something that comes up in regard to payments is the monitoring. So how can people on the ground, how can farmers actually make sure that what they are promising people that they're doing for these payments, that this is actually what they are doing for these payments. And then all of this is sort of an overarching topic of how certain is this what is coming. So especially in the UK, we have the situation with moving away from the EU. With Brexit, there's a lot of uncertainty about payments at the moment in agriculture in general. But there's also this uncertainty still amongst actors on how can these schemes, these private schemes like carbon credits, carbon footprints, and so on, how can these be combined maybe with public subsidies? So there's a lot of ideas, but there's also a lot of uncertainty about this at the moment. And to illustrate this a bit, I've brought you some quotes from our research. So one farmer from the UK, he said, "Payment, I would think, would be the main one. If you got to destock them, one would need to be compensated for the destocking. I can't see any other way." And an Irish farmer who says, "There has never been an idea of any use of peatland, so it wouldn't be a topic we'd speak about. But if there is an incentive there, people will start talking." So also seeing that the payment is something that farmers require, especially in these upland areas, but also that the payment is something that can start a conversation about rewetting that is maybe not there at the moment. Looking a bit more at markets and regulation, here more influenced by the interviews from from the Netherlands, especially, and from the situation on cattail farming, because this is also moving a bit away from maybe the more traditional, or keeping it maybe a bit more of a traditional approach, like in the uplands in Ireland and the UK, where we would re-wet, but that would be basically the lamb would be the same, it would be wetted, it would be destocked, but otherwise it would be, yeah, more or less the same. But in the Netherlands, we look at changing complete production models on the land from a dairy grassland or a grassland that is used for silage making to something, to a field that is basically a rewetted field that is producing cattail. So we're looking at completely different products here as well. And the main barriers that actors identified with regards to this was that there are too few outlets for polyculture crops at the moment, so that the businesses that work with these are actually finding themselves in the double role of creating the demand and working on the products that they produce, but also trying to create the supply at the same time. And of course, this is something that businesses do to a certain degree, create some sort of demand, but not on that scale. So institutionalizing the networks that are already there and connecting actors that are working in the field more to sort of have a more coherent voice on the topic, and also of bringing that topic of polyculture and polyculture crops especially to a bigger picture and to a bigger stage is something that came out of the interviews as something that would be very helpful for these businesses. And at the same time, the problem with cattail farming be not really comparable to other uses at the moment. Speaking of dairy farming again, plus we have the risks here of new practices. So we would ask for someone to do something that's completely new to them, while it is at the moment also not comparable to what they're doing economically at the moment. So the idea here was to work with subsidies and maybe an initial phase of the development and of changing to wet agriculture, but then afterwards using a concept where monetizing ecosystem services would be the way forward, so that not to be dependent on subsidies in the long run, really. And then a major topic as well, to have a strong recognition and a certification of polyculture practices, but also materials on an EU level, which is especially important in like the building sector and insulation sector as well, where buyers need that safety of the product accreditation, really. So also here I brought you a quote, and this person said that the main problem is we don't have a market for cattail in the Netherlands, and that is not something that you can change from one year to another. That is a slow process. And we've heard this every now and then, yesterday as well, that this is something that we need to work on, and maybe with Carbon Connect being extended, we have taken more of a focus on this as well. But the network of people and of actors working on this is certainly something that is important, which is also why it's great that we're all here talking about these topics. And then maybe the last thing I would like to go a bit deeper into now is knowledge and is mindset. So what comes out very clearly in the interviews with especially the upland farmers working with livestock is that peatlands are understood as a managed habitat, and as that being in a managed landscape, and that the perception often was that re-wetting creates a mess, it creates wild places, it creates untidy places, and this is not what all people maybe want or what all people expect their landscape to look like. And at the same time, it also asked a lot of people in terms of changing completely their sort of outlook on their farming enterprises. It is sort of a complete turnaround of what has been like the main narrative in farming of increasing productivity and therefore draining the upland areas, for example. So it is really about redefining roles and understanding of farmers from someone who produces food and produces the maximum amount of food to maybe someone who produces something else, who produces ecological values as well. And some will find this probably more easy to adapt to, but others might find it more difficult as well. And these are very, very personal stories that we need to relate to here. And then at the same time, what we also saw from the interviews that there is, of course, some knowledge on peatland functioning, but it is also limited. There are still some maybe misunderstandings and maybe some lack of understanding what re-wetting entails, what peatland restoration as well entails. So 2 quotes from this. In agriculture, it is very, very easy to continue doing what previous generations have done, and I imagine it will often take more than one generation to make a change. Another quote, I think, unfortunately, all farmers, we're going to get our heads around, and I think this is the worry that some won't. We're going to almost be paid for, we'll almost not be paid for being farmers anymore and farming livestock and producing something. So that really underlines this, sort of personal change that needs to happen for people as well. And to quickly draw some conclusions is that the enablers and constraints that we found were very specific, of course, to the current business models that people were following, and also to the regions that we're looking at, because in the upland areas, again, people there were like, yeah, the drainage, sorry, not the drainage, the rewetting itself is not the problem. We can block the drains and land will wet itself. Whereas when we look into other places like the Netherlands, of course, it will not be that simple and not that easy to also change a whole landscape on a whole landscape level. But what also comes out, of course, is that the economic viability of these business models and of these alternative uses is the core challenge for people, because they say if it is economically viable, then people will go in these directions as well. So it's important that we keep that in our focus as well. And as I've said before, the institutionalizing networks bit to better deliver knowledge, but also to raise awareness for this for people who are already involved with peatland rewetting and with peatland farming, but also with those who are not and who don't work with the products yet, to actually show that there are alternative ways, and maybe that there are options that they haven't even thought about to this point. Thank you.